This video is going to completely spoil Morbius, which doesn't really matter, but just FYI. I'm just going to walk you through the movie scene by scene in as much detail as I can remember from my first and only viewing, and I'll give you some commentary of my thoughts along the way, so here we go. The opening of the film is a shot of a helicopter flying around in Costa Rica and landing in front of a cave. Out of the helicopter hobbles Michael Morbius with crutches under his arms and some other guys with him. He sets up this weird device thing with strings and basically explains to the helicopter guys, these are special vampire bats in here and they can do some pretty cool stuff. Then he cuts his hand to attract the bats out of the cave with his blood, and hundreds of them come flying out. Then we flash back like 30 years or something to Morbius as a kid, in a facility treating him for a rare blood disease that he has. The day in particular we're seeing play out is the day that a new child with the same rare blood disease gets put in the same facility in a bed next to Morbius. This kid's name is Lucian, I think, but for some reason Morbius decides to call him Milo, and the kid's like, but my name is Lucian or whatever. And Morbius is like, yeah, but you're the new Milo. The kid in that bed before you was the new Milo, and the kid before him was the new Milo, and the kid before... So for the rest of the movie, everyone calls this kid an eventual antagonist Milo. I don't know. I'm sure in the comics this weird name change is probably a real thing that makes a little more sense, but this random, out-of-place, unnecessary to the plot moment is just a very early sign that this movie isn't gonna try hard to make a lot of sense. So, believe it or not, I was actually enjoying this movie for a while at the beginning. Taking place in the same cinematic universe, this movie definitely went the Venom 2 route when it comes to pacing. The film moves really fast from scene to scene. Similarly to Venom and Venom Let There Be Carnage, it feels like they filmed a much larger movie that they had to trim down, and after trimming it down, realized that it's not very entertaining, and so they trimmed it down again to make the scenes progress in the shortest amount of time possible so it doesn't get painfully slow and boring. This is something I actually appreciate, because if you're incapable of making a good movie, at least make the bad movie go by faster, you know, make it easier to swallow. Kind of a backhanded compliment, but it is something that makes the movie less bad than it could have been. So Milo starts dying in his hospital bed, and Morbius calls for help, and no one comes, because why would they in this medical facility designed to care for terminally ill children? So Morbius takes a ballpoint pen that was sitting next to his bed, disassembles it, takes the little spring out of the clicky part, and uses that spring to somehow fix the machine that was malfunctioning, and thus restabilizes Milo's vitals and saves his life. After this happens, Morbius' mentor, whose name is... Hold on. Oh. It's just Morbius' mentor. This is probably the fourth most prevalent and important character in the movie behind Morbius, the villain, and the love interest, and he doesn't even have a credited name. Maybe they said his name in the movie, but he obviously wasn't even interesting enough for me to remember. So Morbius' mentor says, yo dude, you just saved this kid's life with a pen spring. You must be like really smart. Let me help you get this scholarship to this really expensive and important sciencey development school where someone will care for you and your condition while you hone your scientific skills. And Morbius is like, bet, I'm gonna go find a cure for me and Milo. And then he leaves. He's only like 10, by the way. Speaking of this mysterious blood disease that they have, the movie never really explains what it is, but it makes them always have to walk with crutches, puts them at constant risk of death, which can only be combated with frequent medical attention, and then supposedly when you reach a certain point in adulthood, you just die anyways and there's nothing anyone can do. So yeah. Back to the present day, Morbius is a super smart scientist now who has done lots of important work in the blood science field and is being offered a Nobel Prize, which he for some reason rejects. Back at his science lab, he realizes, oh shoot, I never solved my blood disease thing and I'm about to die.
I was about to die.
And so he decides to do some science experiments with those vampire bats he got in Costa Rica, and he makes this bat goo serum. No, I really don't feel like explaining his science experiment because it's a superhero movie. So obviously the science doesn't make sense, and it doesn't need to, but basically Morbius says some mumbo-jumbo about these special bats, and that they have these glands in their bodies that filter the blood they eat, turning it into fuel and nutrients and all that good stuff. This trait of the bats causes Morbius to jump to the wild conclusion that if he injects himself with this weird bat goo he made from the bats, it'll give his body the ability to filter out the bad, diseased blood in his body and turn it into normal blood that doesn't painfully kill him. Surprise, surprise, the injection doesn't work out that way and really just makes him have to eat or drink blood to survive, just like the bats. So after his experiment, he's still dying, but now he has to consume blood, specifically human blood for some reason, and when he does, for a limited time, he turns into a superhuman vampire with fangs and claws who's got super speed and can fly. Now, this whole experiment takes place on a cargo ship out on international waters, because the movie describes this experiment as dangerous, expensive, morally ambiguous, and most likely illegal. So he's doing this experiment on this ship, I guess, so he's technically not breaking United States law by not being in the US. I think that's how the movie implied for this scenario to be explained. So now we get the first scene of Morbius being the vampire monster we all came to see, and they actually get to this part really quickly. Like I said before, this movie progresses really fast, which is something I can really appreciate, especially in a superhero, supervillain, anti-hero movie. We all know the main character is going to get their power somehow, and then the movie will happen. So I like movies that don't make us wait an hour for them to actually become the super person. I think my favorite scene in the whole movie is the first Morbius vampire mode scene. When he has his assistant doctor lady inject him with the serum, they strap him down in these locked bonds and stuff, you know, like in Frankenstein or Hulk or any other human testing science experiment movie scene. Well, they got on this cargo ship with these generic criminal bad guys with guns, I guess because this experiment is against the law, and one of them comes down to the lab and is like, "Yo lady, I'm a bad guy and an a-hole, and you're not a doctor, you're a nurse." And she's like, "Actually, I am a doctor, scumbag." And they just kind of glare at each other and bicker, you know, really generic gender conflict stuff that doesn't actually portray a normal human interaction. Well, while they're arguing, they turn around and Morbius is gone. He got out of his bonds. In typical movie fashion, they make the very wise decision to go into the sealed science room to look for him, where he's hanging from the ceiling in a dark corner like a bat. Then he flies around killing all the criminal guys. The scene is actually really cool. His special effects look good, he's intimidating, and his powers in this particular scene are really, really awesome. I was fully on board with this movie while watching this scene. I was like, okay, we had to get through the boring and stereotypical superhero movie stuff, but that was a given, and the movie speeds through it in like 15 or 20 minutes. Now we get to watch this crazy monster guy do some really cool stuff for the rest of the runtime. This is gonna be great. Yeah, the back 80% of this movie is just straight up dog crap. So, somehow the doctor lady doesn't die during Morbius' bloodthirsty rampage because one of the criminal guys knocked her out during the whole scuffle. So apparently Vampire Morbius was like, "Oh, I only like the taste of conscious human blood, so I'll eat all the other guys, but let her chill." Sure, whatever. I don't care. He turns back into human form, Morbius, realizes what he just did, finds the doctor lady and calls the authorities, I guess? Coast Guard? I don't know. He calls somebody to come commandeer the ship and save the survivors, of which I believe there's just the one lady. And Morbius jumps off the ship and swims away. Side note, are bats good swimmers? Or is he just some semi-cripple swimming however many miles through the ocean back to shore with expensive science serum in his pocket? Let's not linger our thoughts on this question, because if we do that with every question this movie will generate, then the movie will drive us mad. Back at his land-based lab, he starts documenting, as scientists do, the results of his bat goo injection experiment. And this is basically just a narration exposition dump of Jared Leto telling us what Morbius's powers are. Flight, hyper-athleticism, super hearing, typical super stuff. We also find out that he's trying to sustain himself with artificial blood, but it's not nearly as effective as live human blood, and the artificial blood's effectiveness is rapidly decreasing, basically meaning that in a few days he'll have no choice but to consume live human blood or die. Well, for some reason, grown man Milo, played by that one guy from that Doctor Who show I've never seen, shows up at Morbius's lab and is like, "Yo homie, it looks like you found that cure for our blood disease that's cursed us our whole lives. That's great. Can I have it?" And Morbius is like, "Nah, bro, you don't understand. It turns you into this crazy blood-craving homicidal monster, bro. I just murdered like a dozen people, and I'm probably gonna do it again. Plus, the effects wear off periodically, and I'm still dying anyway, so I'm sorry, but I can't let you inject the serum." And so Milo goes, "Oh, well, then I'm gonna f***ing kill you." But then he leaves, because Morbius used a harsh tone with him and hurt his feelings. So, when Morbius is leaving his lab, these detective guys stop him and are like, "Yo, you're Morbius." And he's like, "Yeah." And they're like, "You killed all those people, didn't you?" And he's like, "No." And they're like, "Yeah, you did. You're coming with us." And they try to handcuff him. So the Morbius goes, "Grr, I'm Batman. Grr, I'm a vampire," and flies away. And the cops chase him on foot. Yeah, I don't think that's gonna work, guys. So Morbius lands on a rooftop and is like, dang, actually, I did murder a bunch of people. I'm kind of a piece of shit. Maybe I should be locked up. And so he lets the cops arrest him and throws him in a heavily guarded insane asylum type prison. Sometime around while all of this is happening, Milo supposedly walks back into Morbius's lab and injects himself with the serum and gets the same bat vampire powers. We don't see this happen, but it's revealed soon. We do get to see what's actually a pretty cool horror scene of this nurse leaving the laboratory at night with all the lights off and getting stalked by something in the shadows, which we are led to presume is Morbius. And at the end of the scene, she gets capped by a dark figure hiding in the shadows. Spoiler alert, this is Milo killing her shortly after he became a vampire himself. What I hate about this is that it's so obviously not Morbius doing this act, but the movie tries to lead you to believe that it is, because up until this point we haven't seen any other vampire people. Anyways, so we see the two detectives interrogate Morbius, and there's actually a cute little joke where one of the detectives brings holy water to the holding room because he doesn't want to take any chances. I don't know. It made me chuckle. Probably because I was really trying to extract some enjoyment out of this movie at this point. But the detective guys say, hey man, WTF, why'd you kill that innocent nurse at the lab? We can understand the criminals on the cargo ship, we don't even really care about them that much. But you killed this poor nurse who's a single mother. And Morbius just says, oh, I don't know why I did that. Like, what? Bro, you're telling me that you just don't remember whether or not you killed this innocent woman? After the first scene of you killing all the guys on the ship, you clearly knew what you just did as soon as it was over. Maybe it was the context clues from all the dead, blood-drained bodies around you, but I don't know. He says when he gets into his blood-hungry erection mode, his mind goes fuzzy or something, but that's not an excuse to just forget taking the life of an innocent human being who works for you at the lab. It would have made way more sense to me if he argued with the detectives a little bit like, listen, I didn't kill that girl, someone else must be out there, and they just didn't believe him. But no, instead Morbius just says, oh, I guess I forgot about killing that one particular individual at this separate location. Oopsie. Anyways, weird rant about an obscure moment over. Morbius is in prison and Milo goes to visit him. Milo basically just says to Morbius, hey bro, you're super powerful, and even though you killed those 12 dudes and maybe that nurse, I know you and I know you're not a murderer on the inside. So you should just use your powers to break out of this prison and go do your thing in society. Also, I may have injected the serum and killed that girl. Lol. Okay, bye. And so Morbius gets pissed and breaks out of the prison instantly to go fight Milo. The movie is only around halfway over at this point, and I'm so exhausted talking about it. Like I said, a lot of information is conveyed very quickly in this movie. So Morbius and Milo fight, and then they fight in the subway, and the whole time Milo is trying to convince Morbius to, like, team up with him, I guess, so they can be murdering vampires together, and Morbius is like, no. So during their fight, Milo kills several cops and a civilian or two, and the detectives blame it on Morbius again. The next chunk of the movie is where it gets really boring and forgettable, so I might leave some stuff out or not remember everything. Also, this script is getting kind of long, so I'm going to try to speed through the back chunk of this movie. So Morbius goes to that doctor lady from the beginning that helped him inject the serum and says, hey, I need some help. I'm a monster. And even though she saw him go apeshit at the beginning of the movie, and she can see on the news all of the damage he's causing and people dying around him, she's somehow not freaked out by him being around her. She's perfectly cool with it, and this weird, irrational action definitely doesn't get her foreseeably killed later on. They're talking at this diner, and the next part makes no sense. So they see these two guys walk in and start harassing this cashier girl about a counterfeit $100 bill they're trying to spend, and she's like, I can't take this, it's obviously fake. And they're like, no, you're gonna take it, and they start threatening her, and she takes the fake money. So these guys leave the restaurant, and Morbius follows these guys for one purpose. He follows them so he can find their counterfeit bill-making lab and steal their science equipment from them. What? He doesn't care about sticking up for the cashier girl. He doesn't care about the counterfeit money scheme. He lets all of the criminals go and doesn't even harm them, other than the one whose hand he breaks as intimidation to convince them all to give him the lab. And I'm not a scientist, nor have I ever counterfeited any money, so I'm not familiar with the money counterfeiting process. But are you telling me that a paper currency counterfeiting operation and a blood research facility use similar equipment? That cannot be true. And if that is accurate to real life, then I'm extremely uneducated on how those two activities line up. Anyways, so he steals the lab, and he and the doctor lady use the lab to develop an antibody that combats the vampire serum in his body. While doing this, completely out of nowhere, The two just start making out on a rooftop, while Milo watches from the street below like a creep. There has been literally no chemistry, no connection, no relationship building, no development of these two characters together whatsoever, and they just start macking on each other out of nowhere. The only hint in the whole movie that they might be interested in each other before they start kissing is at the beginning of the movie. Morbius is talking with Milo while they're both still crippled and hobbling around, and Milo says, "You know, you've been spending a lot of time in your research. Are you sure that's not because you like your doctor coworker lady?" And Morbius is like, "I work all the time because I'm trying to find a way for us both not to die, dude. Like, obviously." But she is very smart and very helpful. So an off-the-wall tease from the villain that they may like each other is the only basis that we have for them to be kissing at this point. Underdeveloped romance is dumb. We also get a scene of Dr. Lady playing with her cat while Morbius is working on the anti-serum, and while playing with her cat, she cuts her finger, and Morbius smells the blood and gets super blood-tempted and starts to go vampire mode. And Dr. Lady just sits there and stares at Morbius fight back his vampire state. Eventually, Morbius is like, "Yo, you want to wrap that up? I'm kind of trying not to eat you here." And she's like, "Oh, sure." Like, girl, you know the situation. Are you trying to die? So somehow Morbius makes this anti-serum, but the problem is, it's not actually going to fix the problem. It doesn't cure the vampire thing. What it really is a concoction that's lethally poisonous to both bats and humans. So the serum is just going to instantly kill any vampire injected with it. Morbius makes 2 of these serums, one for Milo and one for himself. Dr. Lady opposes this idea and says, "No, you can't off yourself." But Morbius reasonably is like, "No, I'm a murderer as well. It won't be long before the artificial blood stops being effective and I have to kill people to survive. It'll be better if I just die with Milo so we don't have to murder anymore." Hold on to this thought because I'm going to bring it up again in a little bit. I need to rant about the film's antagonist now. Milo freaking sucks. What we see Milo do next is the most frustrating, character-assassinating action I have ever seen. Well, maybe not ever, and maybe it's not character assassination if your character had no character to begin with, but what Milo does next ended any chance he ever had of being a believable character with any kind of logical goals or motives. So Morbius and Milo's mentor, who after sending Morbius off to science school spent the next 30 years at Milo's side as his caretaker, keeping after him every single day and preserving his life. This man who dedicated the last 3 decades of his life pouring into Milo, realizes what Milo's doing and what he's become, and he goes to confront him about it. He goes to Milo and tells him, "Listen, what you're doing isn't right. I know you're able to walk normally and feel good physically for the first time in your life, but you can't be killing people to get that. Maybe there's something else we can do. Maybe we can help Morbius keep advancing his science, and maybe we can find a real cure, one that will turn you two into regular humans instead of monsters." And Milo goes, "Nah, that sounds like a bore," and he f***ing kills him. Just slashes him across the stomach and leaves him to die. He doesn't eat him, he doesn't drain his blood, he just kills him for sport and leaves. It's no secret to anyone that I talk about movies with that I love villains. More specifically, I love good villains. I like my villains to be convincing, strong characters with defined beliefs, motives, and traits that conflict with the hero's character. Basically, I need them to have a good reason for doing what they're doing. Milo is one of the worst villains I can ever remember seeing. Superhero movie villains are notorious for being lackluster most of the time, but that's not always the case, especially in the last 5 years or so. Killmonger was a really good villain with clear beliefs and motives that drove him and that combated with T'Challa's character. The Riddler from that new Batman movie was a very smart and calculated villain who was given a convincing backstory that explains why he was driven to be doing what he's doing. The Green Goblin from Spider-Man No Way Home is a great villain. My point is, superhero movies in recent years from multiple different studios have been able to craft lots of interesting, intimidating villains. So my question is, why is Milo the Vampire so bad? I'm asking that question extremely literally. Somebody tell me why this guy is so evil. Just as he says in the movie, this man has dedicated his entire life to being at Milo's bedside, caring for him and keeping him alive. And the second Milo is able to walk on his own 2 feet, he repays that man's dedication with death. Milo doesn't eat him, he isn't provoked, he barely even uses his death as bait. In fact, scratch that, the only purpose killing this guy serves to Milo is baiting Morbius away from the other bait he'll use immediately after. Morbius was already planning to find Milo to try and stop him. Milo didn't even need to use bait at all. But giving Milo the benefit of the doubt that he didn't know Morbius was going to be coming after him, just using your mutual mentor as bait would have worked just fine. Why use him as bait to get Morbius away from another character you're going to use as bait? This makes no sense and makes me so mad because Milo should adore this man and see himself as indebted to him. Even if it would have still been lame, I would have been fine if he just went vampire hungry mode and killed him for his blood. But nope! Slash him in the stomach and leave him to slowly die. Super logical, bro. So then the dying mentor calls Morbius and is like, yo, come here. And so Morbius goes there and he's like, yo, stop Milo. As if Morbius didn't already know that that was on the to-do list. And while this is happening, Milo goes to the lab and kidnaps Dr. Lady so Morbius will go be angry and fight him. Again, if Milo's end goal is to get Morbius to team up with him, I have no idea how he could possibly think this would work. Let's kill Morbius's mentor, capture his girlfriend, and then expect him to want to team up. Milo is the stupidest human being I have ever seen in a fictional film. So Morbius goes to confront Milo to save Dr. Lady, and I don't even want to acknowledge the fake-out death scene they give her. So Morbius and Milo fight in the sky and somehow end up underground. I mentioned earlier that I really liked the first Morbius action scene on the cargo ship because his powers and abilities looked really good with the special effects. Well, each time we've seen his powers used since then, the effects have been progressively worse up until this point, the final battle and climax of the movie, where you literally cannot make out a single thing that is happening. The shadowy darkness effects we've been seeing the whole movie, that I really liked at first, are now completely ruined and look like garbage. Somehow, while fighting in the sky, Morbius and Milo drive each other through the asphalt of a New York City street and wind up fighting in this wide open underground sewer chamber. And Milo says something like, "I'm evil," and Morbius says something like, "That's not good," and then Morbius somehow summons like 12,000 bats, because that's apparently something he can do. Bats that are apparently living in the New York sewers 10 feet away from where they're fighting. The only thing that explains this action is earlier in the movie, Milo looks at his tank of bats from Costa Rica, and he says, "I've been bonding with them." So that apparently means he can summon thousands of them at any moment to come to his aid. So Morbius surrounds himself in this bat tornado thing, and Milo tries to jump into the bat tornado with a spear, and obviously that doesn't work and he loses the fight. Morbius injects him with the anti-serum, Milo dies, and Morbius flies away into the night sky, and the movie ends. That's it. Over. Done. I left out a couple of details in the movie that I probably should have mentioned. Like, Morbius supposedly did one of those vampire multiplication bites on Dr. Lady to save her life, and thus turning her into a vampire. When Morbius flies out of the sewer at the very end of the movie with a legion of bats surrounding him, the cops and detectives that are standing by the chasm in the street are not fazed whatsoever by this sight. They just kind of glare sternly at the mind-bogglingly event, like it's not shocking whatsoever. And also, we get a shirtless scene of Milo doing his best Bully Maguire impression. Actually, I didn't mind that part. Also, remember that part where Morbius makes a second anti-serum for himself so he can inject himself after the battle? Yeah, well, he just straight up doesn't do that. He just flies away and goes home. Just completely forgets that he's gonna turn into a homicidal maniac in a matter of hours, and he doesn't even care anymore. And the movie doesn't even care to explain what happens next either. Something I've heard a lot of people say about this movie already is that it feels like one of those older superhero movies from the early 2000s that all had the same uninteresting plot and similar flaws, and I definitely agree with that description. The movie is generic, predictable, and uninteresting. It moves at a quick pace, and the effects, for the most part, do look pretty good, mainly just aside from that final fight that is literally incomprehensible. I also only watched the movie once, so I'm sure upon a rewatch that will never happen. I could find more things to be positive about, and probably a lot more things to rip on the movie for. A lot of people are really upset about there being a whole bunch of things in the trailers that weren't in the actual movie, mainly a whole bunch of Spider-Man references like Oscorp being involved, Spider-Man graffiti, and the Vulture from Spider-Man Homecoming actually being in the movie. I mean, this one is just blatant misleading. If you Google the movie, he's listed as the second character. I agree that these misleadings are frustrating, but I tried to go into the movie with absolutely no expectations, and this movie was still utterly and frustratingly disappointing. One moment in particular from the trailers that was head-scratchingly altered was this joke while Morbius is stealing the laboratory from the counterfeiters. The one whose hand he breaks cries out, "Who are you?" And Morbius answers, "I'm Venom," and snarls at him before saying, "Lol, just kidding." In the actual movie, this joke is left in, but for some reason you can barely tell what Morbius says in that moment. It's like, "Who are you?" And it's much quicker than in the trailer. The only reason I knew what he said in that moment is because that joke was in the trailers where it was actually able to be understood. I don't know why they would edit that 5-second sequence to be less comprehensible in the actual movie. The most common theme of this movie is that almost none of it makes any logical sense. Their tagline while promoting this film was "A new Marvel legend arrives," and the only way that statement holds weight is that Morbius the film's arrival was legendarily subpar. On a good day, I rate Morbius a 4 out of 10, but it's probably closer to a 3 out of 10, so pick whichever one you'd rather me choose. Now, as a bonus, let's talk about the post-credit scenes. I watched this movie with my brother, and when the first mid-credit scene started, I grabbed his arm and audibly said, "Holy crap," in actual excitement. The New York City night sky opens up in a purple crack exactly like the ones from the end of Spider-Man No Way Home. I really cherished those 2 seconds of feeling like I was watching something cool and exciting. Immediately, the multiverse rift closes up and we cut to a jail cell where the Vulture, played by Michael Keaton, materializes in the cell. What makes me hate this is that the movie was marketed waving the Vulture in our faces, so any surprise or shock value that this movie could have brought with this Vulture and the Sony Spider-Verse reveal is completely lost. We all already knew he would be in this movie somewhere, so this is nothing exciting. You're telling us what we already know, so this isn't cool anymore. Anyway, so he turns to a mirror that jail cells totally have and says to himself, "I hope the food's better in this joint." And it's probably because this movie was so painstakingly not enjoying to watch, but I really was not in the mood for some forced, unfunny humor at this point, so this joke just annoyed me. So the guards are like, "What the frick, how'd you get in there?" And Vulture's like, And so they just let him walk out, because he's not a criminal in this universe. So he just leaves. Just like that. Walks out of prison. Second credit scene. We see human Michael Morbius driving down a road outside of the city, and he pulls off at some spot and gets out of the car. In the distance, we see the Vulture in his full robot suit from Spider-Man Homecoming flying in from the city. He lands in front of Morbius and basically says, "You're Morbius, right?" And Morbius is like, "Yeah." And Vulture's like, "You can do some pretty cool stuff." And Morbius is like, "Yeah." And Vulture's like, "I'm still not sure how I got here, and I'm pretty sure it's got something to do with Spider-Man. You and me should team up, maybe find some more guys like us, and we could go do some stuff, I don't know." And Morbius is like, "That sounds interesting." And that's it. There are so many things I don't like about this. How does Vulture have his full Vulture suit from Homecoming when he just got warped here from prison? What? How? I've seen some tweets from the director who makes me hate this movie even more, trying to explain away these things that make no sense. For one, how is Vulture even here? The whole point of the spell in Spider-Man No Way Home is that everyone is returned back to their home universe. Vulture was already in his home universe. The director of Morbius explains this by saying, "We see clearly in Spider-Man No Way Home and the post-credit scene of Venom 2 that characters connected with Spider-Man could traverse between realities during during Doctor Strange's spell. But that's not true. The only thing that we can see clearly is that the characters involved with the spell were sent back to their home universe. I hate that this movie takes away from the logic of one of my personal favorite films of all time. When asked about how Vulture could possibly have his Vulture suit from Spider-Man Homecoming, this was his answer. If you look closely, you'll notice that the suit from Morbius is slightly different from his suit in Homecoming. It's a completely different suit. He's a resourceful guy, and he made a new one in this universe. What? I would almost accept this as plausible, except the only way he was able to make the Vulture suit in the first place was with the Chitauri alien tech he stole from the Avengers 1 wreckage. There are no Avengers or Chitauri in this Sony universe, so how could he have remade the suit? I don't know, man. The other thing I really hate about this whole inclusion of Vulture in this movie is that Vulture is one of my favorite MCU villains. In Spider-Man Homecoming, he's just a guy. He's a dad trying to provide for his family, and is driven to believe that his only method of doing that is using the Chitauri tech he found to do crime. He's a super nice and chill dude to Peter before he realizes he's Spider-Man and is trying to foil his operation, but he's a real and believable guy. He even keeps Peter's identity secret from Scorpion and the other criminals in the prison at the end, because now that he's defeated, he doesn't have any reason to harm him anymore. He doesn't care about revenge. Plus, Peter saved his life, and his daughter cared a lot about Peter, and caring after his daughter was his driving force in the first place. In these post-credit scenes, he just comes off as a goofy, mindless villain who for some reason wants to start a supervillain team to force a future Sinister Six villain team-up. I, more than anyone else, have wanted a Sinister Six Spider-Man story on the big screen, but not in a way that's forced, based on bad movies like this one, and one that ruins the predetermined characters in order to establish. And sure, technically we don't know that Vulture wants to form this team to do evil, but that's most likely gonna be what ends up happening. Anyways, I've been talking for way too long. I think I got most of my thoughts out there, but I've got to wrap it up. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I've been wanting to get into movie reviews and film essays for a while, and decided to just go for it with this one for the first time. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of Morbius, and if you'd like to see more movie reviews and or film essays from me, let me know what you want me to talk about next. Thanks so much for making it to the end here. My name is Kyrogus, and I'll catch you later. Peace out.